All right, so good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or wherever you're at. Welcome to the fourth day of the annual Disability Statistics Conference, session number 4 on disability and African Americans. We're going to give you some upfront logistics first, and then I'll turn it over to our moderator, Shelly Reeves. All right, so some Zoom tips. You can select the speakers. Sometimes it changes, you never know where the speakers are going to come from. It changes randomly. So if you're having trouble hearing, the first thing to do is check to make sure that your audio settings are appropriately done. You can also choose the closed captioning. We have subtitles as well via CART, and we have our ASL interpreters as well. They've been pinned to the top to be the top video. For folks on computers that have multiple, when there are multiple speakers, you can choose options. You can do side-by-side mode, or you can view in a gallery across the top. Zoom has a lot of flexibility with what you see. This webinar is being recorded, as well as the question and answer area. We will be posting all of these materials later on disabilitycompendium.org. We'll be posting all of the bios and the slides from our speakers, not just from today, but from the previous 3 days. This webinar is, this website is also where you can find the compendium, annual report, our infographics, and all the materials that we generate every year. As an attendee of this webinar, you're a viewer. You can ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll either answer them live, we'll answer them via text, or wait till the end of the session to give some answers. Speakers will be, the chat function is actually disabled. We can send chats out, but you can't send chats in. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box, even if it's just a logistical question. If you have any questions after this webinar, you can contact us at disability.statistics@unh.edu. And you can call us toll free at 866-538-9521 for more information. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Shelly. Shelly's going to introduce our panel, but then we also have some summary and closing remarks from David Wittenberg and David Mann from Mathematical Policy Research. They'll talk about the whole 4 days, and by all means, everybody stick around for that, because they'll usually have some, usually they'll have some insightful comments to make. So, all right, take it away, Shelly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrew. Greetings, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's panel discussion on the topic of disability and African Americans. I'm pleased to start by introducing all of our speakers for today's session, and then we'll dive right in. Our first speakers are Dr. Kimberly Phillips and Marisa Rafal. Dr. Phillips is a research assistant professor with the Institute on Disability, UCED, at the University of New Hampshire. Ms. Rafal is a project research specialist also at the Institute on Disability, UCED, at the University of New Hampshire. They both will be discussing social inequities experienced by African Americans. Our second set of speakers includes Dr. Edward Manyibe and Dr. Andre Washington, excuse me. Dr. Manyibe is a research associate professor at Langston University, and also serves as the capacity building director with their NIDILRR-funded RRTC on research and capacity building for minority entities. Dr. Washington is a research assistant professor at Langston University, while also serving as technical coordinator with Langston's RRTC on research and capacity building for minority entities. Together, they will be discussing a national rehabilitation research capacity building and COVID-19 agenda among African Americans with disabilities. And they'll be guiding us through this discussion from a social determinants of health perspective. After their presentations, we'll take time for questions and answers. And I encourage you to submit any questions that you have in the Q&A box on the platform, as Andrew had mentioned. And we'll do our best to get through all of the questions. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Phillips and Marisa Rafal.
Thank you very much. Today our presentation is called Disability Infographic, Social Inequities Experienced by African Americans. The infographic is a product of the NIDILRR-funded Disability Statistics and Demographics RRTC and was created in collaboration with our colleagues from Langston University. I am advancing my slide, yes. So this grant cycle, the Stats Research on Disability team launched a new infographic series to explore the intersection of disability with other key social identities. This year, we focused on African Americans with disabilities. And more than 3.5 million African American adults aged 18 to 64 have a disability, according to the American Community Survey. That's 13.3% of African American working age adults, a slightly higher prevalence than the 10.4% among all races in the US. And speaking of the American Community Survey, that is one of the primary data sources we used, as you'll hear more shortly from Marisa. We also analyzed data from additional sources that enabled us to look more closely at different aspects of community living and participation. As always, the Stats Research on Disability team commits to updating these infographics each year with the most recently available data so that they continue to be accurate and current. So we know from prior research that social inequities are compounded at the intersection of disability and race. And I'd like to share an example to illustrate what I mean by that. So on the screen, there are some data on the percentage of people who lack adequate housing. And it's a bar graph, and the bar on the left represents the group that is least likely to lack adequate housing. And the bar on the far right represents the group most likely to lack adequate housing. So it's, in this scenario, it's worse, if you will, to be on the far right. So I didn't actually add numbers to this graph because I want the trend to be the focus here, not the actual statistic, but it is 4% on the far left going up to 11% on the far right, just for your information. Now, when I add a label, this graph shows that people with disabilities are more likely than people without disabilities to lack adequate housing. And this is actually true. It does represent actual data. When I add information about race, just among the no disability group, it shows that compared to all races, African Americans are more likely to lack adequate housing. Then, when I layer in disability, this is where the inequity is most striking. So this case illustrates that often there is an underlying disparity between people with and without disabilities, and a disparity between all races and African Americans. And when you put these two together, you get an area that really is in need of attention. And so that's what I mean when I say compounding inequities at the intersection. Now, we have to make choices about which data and which comparisons to display in our infographics. The goal of an infographic is to illustrate a data story in a visually compelling way. And to do this usually involves a trade-off between breadth, meaning more data points, and brevity, being short and to the point. And of course, without sacrificing accuracy. So our infographic about African Americans with disabilities tells this story, looking only at people with disabilities. And we use all races as our referent group for comparison with African Americans. And unfortunately, even without including the no disability groups, the inequities are pretty striking. So it's our hope that the infographic points out areas where policy and practice can promote equity, for example, among the social determinants of health like education and employment. And it's our hope that the infographic illustrates underlying barriers that need to be addressed in order to ensure that African Americans with disabilities can live to their full potential and participate to the fullest extent in their communities of choice. Right now, the screen shows just a screenshot of the infographic, which you probably received a copy of if you when you registered in your compendium packet. I also want to let you know that this will be available on disabilitycompendium.org, or you can email us at disability.statistics@unh.edu to request a hard copy or an electronic copy. And now I will turn it over to my colleague Marisa, who will share some detail from the infographic.
Yeah, thank you so much. So one of the first sections you'll find on the infographic is the education section. And for this first icon on the far left of the little classroom, that data came from IDEA Part B or IDEA Part B. So special education students ages 6 to 21. And what we found was that African American students with disabilities were 12.5% more likely to spend time outside of a regular classroom compared to students of all races with disabilities. So in school, but not necessarily in the mainstream classroom as often. Another thing we found with that same 6 to 21 age grouping and data source was that African American students with disabilities were 181% more likely to be placed in a correctional facility compared to students of all races with disabilities. And it is important to keep in mind that this was a small proportion for both groups. It was less than 1%. But what was really striking was the disparity or the inequity in who's being placed into these facilities and at what rates. We also used the American Community Survey to examine graduation data and found that African Americans were 4% less likely to have completed high school compared to people of all races with disabilities. And the next slide. We also examined employment data, and this came from the American Community Survey and was ages 18 to 64, so kind of that typical working age group. What we found was that African Americans with disabilities were 29% less likely to be employed compared to people of all races with disabilities. On the next slide, you'll see that we examined poverty as well. And we found that African Americans with disabilities, same data source, same age group, were 32% more likely to experience poverty compared to people of all races with disabilities. Lastly, we looked at housing, and this came from the American Housing Survey. And what we looked at was African Americans with disabilities compared again to people of all races with disabilities. And we found that African Americans with disabilities were 37.5% more likely to lack adequate housing. And the American Housing Survey defines adequacy using different factors, things like what's the heating situation, plumbing, wiring, is the wiring exposed in the dwelling, those kinds of things. And just for context, the American Housing Survey looks at people ages 16 and up, so slightly different age grouping there. I think that pretty much covers the infographic and all the different details. So we'd just like to give a huge thank you to our partners at Langston. It was really fun collaborating with their great research team there, and our logo colors matched, so ideal. But a huge thank you to them. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Kim Phillips, who you heard from earlier, her email is kimberly.phillips@unh.edu. I'm Marisa, and my email address is marisa.rafal@unh.edu. and our phone number as well as 603-862-4320 with the relay 711. So with that, I will pass it to Doctors Manyibe and Washington from Langston.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name again is Edward Manyibe from Langston University, and I'm here with Dr. Washington. And our topic today is to look at national rehabilitation research capacity building and COVID-19 agenda among African Americans with disabilities. And we are using associated terms of health perspective as we present. Just a little bit of background. Now that we have had the infographics, we said we are not going to provide you with any data because already we know this, we know what's happening. So ours is to tell you really what Langston University RRTC is doing in terms of addressing some of these programs. So Langston, the mission of Langston University RRTC is to empower minority serving institutions, and sometimes referred to as minority entities. That's to include historically Black colleges and universities, as HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, and Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions to improve their disability and rehabilitation research capacity and the infrastructure by conducting a programmatic line of research, examining experiences and outcomes of persons with disabilities from traditionally underserved racial and ethnic populations and the communities, and of course, capacity building efforts. So what's the program? As I mentioned, the program was already clearly documented, as we have had, and recent focus research indicates that such disparities, which we have had, trends are likely to ensure in the absence of innovative policy and practice interventions. And where African Americans, for example, make up 13% of the USA population, they account for only 4.8% of professionals employed in the science and engineering disciplines. So when you look at biomedical research, all those areas. So what are some of the drivers of existing inequities? I think there's, of course, this is a complex, but we think an important driver of these national disparities is the under-participation of HBCUs and other minority serving institutions and their researchers of color, including those with disabilities in federally sponsored disability health and rehabilitation research. Yeah, research shows that there's a clear that African Americans, for example, are really underrepresented in research. Whether you look at publications, whether you look at who is receiving research funds and all those kind of things. In fact, recently the National Science, so many institutions, including federal governments and the organizations that have come out and saying they now recognize their role they have played in terms of promoting these inequities. And I'm sure some of you saw what the APA said, the American Association of, okay.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Manyibe. So what the RRTC is doing to address the problem, RRTC, of course, is funded by, funding agency is NIDILRR, and we have 8 projects that we're simultaneously working on. Here's a slide that kind of talks about the 8 projects, or gives you the titles of 8 projects and the collaboration engaged that we're engaged with our partners. Our first research agenda, research project is our peer-to-peer mentorship research team model, what we call our PMRTM evaluation. Of course, our collaborations are ICI, that's in Boston with the University of Boston, and South Carolina State University, and the Kessler Foundation, that's the KF, the Kessler Foundation, and our 5 MSI institutions that we're working with. And the 5 minority institutions are Mercy College. They are Hispanic Serving Institution. You have Alabama State University, which is a HBCU, and you have North Carolina A&T, which is HBCU, and you have University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, which is a Hispanic Serving Institution, and then we have one tribal college, and that's Little Priest Tribal College, which is in Winnebago, Nebraska. So those 5 MSIs is the makeup of our IRC-BIM project. We have the peer-to-peer mentor model, evaluation in ICI, South Carolina State and Kaiser Foundations involved with that, a national investigation on opioid use disorder impacts on employment. That's RRTC. That's one of our big projects that we're doing. We call it Project 2. The State Vocational Rehabilitation Agency and Veterans Affairs emerging co-service practice model that we're doing in collaboration with Department of Rehabilitation Services and also the Veterans VR&E services there here in the state of Oklahoma. We're going to have some next slides to kind of talk about each one of these real specific and the goals of them. But this is just a list of the titles. We have our national Delphi study that looks at HBCUs and small African American tech firms that we're doing, which a lot of our doctoral fellows is part of that. We have a project examining fifth-funded MSIs based research centers. We call this Project 6. Challenges and opportunities advancing the disability/rehabilitation or health science, and that's a collaboration between us and the USAID's early intervention disability rehabilitation and health research career path. That's the Kaiser Foundation. We're collaborating with, and that's a pilot study that a few of our doctoral fellows is helping with that too. Minority entity, that's our IRC-BIM, our longitudinal study. It's a mixed methods evaluation. We've been doing this. This is the longitudinal side of it. We did our first 5-year stint. Now we're on the 3rd year of our second go around of funding. So we're on the 8th year of that particular study. And as we added the COVID-19 agenda, kind of midway, this happened as our research center was already working on these other projects. So of course, we wanted to look at what was happening here and now. So we added a COVID-19 agenda. Moving forward, peer-to-peer mentor research model, what we call a program 1A. Edward.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Washington. Yes, so the peer-to-peer mentorship research team model, the goal of this model is to, this promising and emerging framework is to test the model's potential for building faculty member scientific research skills in the areas of, for example, research design, data collection techniques, development theoretical frameworks, and of course, grant writing and proposal development. So this model is being implemented currently at the 5 minority serving institutions that Dr. Washington mentioned. So we are implementing and we will evaluate it and we'll, of course, disseminate the results. So the second one, yeah, we have the peer multiple mentor model. And this model is being implemented at Langston University RRTC, whereby it's really the different way of looking at what NIDILRR normally calls the ARRT. So we came up with a different approach, recognizing that fellows have different needs, and this research showing that really the traditional model whereby you have one mentor providing mentorship service to a fellow, a junior or early career investigator is not working, especially within the context of manual serving institutions. So we are testing this, and hopefully once we evaluate the model, we'll present the results, and so we can see whether this model can produce different results. Okay. The next one is this is another study that we're conducting, whereby we are investigating the opioid use disorder impacts on employment prospects for people with disabilities from racial, ethnic, diverse backgrounds. What we did first, we did conduct focus group, and based on that, on the results of the focus group, we developed a survey, and that survey is being administered currently. So we are collecting data. So of course, once we collected it, what we hope is that eventually the results can inform, of course, policy interventions, and can enforce also practice interventions, and of course come up with some suggestions for further research.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Washington?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our state vocational rehabilitation agency in Veteran Affairs emerging co-service practice model demonstration. So the goal of this particular project is to address the innovation gap by field testing the state vocational rehab and VA VRNE co-service partnership model potential in the real world environment. So this particular project is very, very close related to our Native American tribal VR and Veteran Affairs project as well. They run tandem. We're looking at veterans of color that's getting served by state VR and VRNE and state VR and tribal rehab counseling programs. So the ideal is to get some early adopters. There's always been a co-service memorandum or partnership between the agencies, but nothing real formal. It's usually just kind of about relationships of the happen to be of the counselors to maybe get that going. So we're looking at some best practices in the real world as they're working with these veterans, and things that we can do to really shore up the co-service practice model there with this particular project. This is the Delphi that I talked about earlier in regards to HBCUs and small African-American owned tech firms. So the goal is to generate some empirical information about the barriers to the participation of HBCUs and small African-American tech firms in federal assisting technology research and development. This information generated could be used to develop policy and practice. So what we're looking at here is to get perspectives from the HBCUs and the small African-American tech firms to come up with some information that would help bridge that gap. So that's that particular project. Examining the federal funded MSI research-based centers and challenges and opportunities for advancing the disability and rehabilitation health or science, health and science. So this particular project, the goal is to identify factors that begin to fill the knowledge gap that challenges face federal funded MSI housed research centers and advancing the science in the field of disability and rehabilitation in health. So this particular project really looks at the MSIs and more particularly in the USAID area and how small research centers try to fill that gap between a knowledge gap. So they can present and go for federal funding, have more research coming out of their centers in peer-reviewed journals. So bridging that gap with their staff and faculty there at those smaller MHI research centers. So that particular project is it's looking at that, and it's ongoing right now as we speak. This early intervention and disability rehabilitation in health research center pathway, what we call EIRCPM pilot study. The goal here is to identify the factors contribute to the fellows, our fellows that we have here at the center, interest and willingness to be mentored in the area of minority and disability research, and identify specific intervention strategies of the research projects that were considered to be most significant in their development during their course of study. I will let Edward, Dr. Manyibe, kind of elaborate on this. He's one of the leads on this project, if he had anything else to say about this one before I move on.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Washington. Really, this model is really consistent with what we have we presented again regarding the peer-to-peer models that we are implementing. Again, the background, as I said, is that generally African Americans and other minorities are under-participating. And one of the things that we have realized that it's a huge need is mentorship. And so for this particular model is that we realize that starting earlier in terms of intervention, providing undergraduate, master's level students and those who are also in the postdoctoral programs, providing them with the kind of skills and mentorship needed so that they can start developing their research agenda. And this is really, we are trying to start earlier. We are implementing, this is a pilot study, and hopefully it can inform a more robust intervention. Thank you, Dr. Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the next one is the minority entity institutional research capacity building and infrastructure model. These are longitudinal study, as Dr. Washington mentioned, and this is really like our, we'll say our signature study. And this model is, we are trying to develop the capacity of minority serving institutions to be able to participate in research. And so what we did, we conducted a needs assessment. We interviewed people at individuals at these minority serving institutions, including presidents, vice presidents for academic affairs, the individuals in the RB, institutional review boards, office of sponsor. We looked at the whole systems, and we say we developed a model, which is IQBIM, that we are using to provide interventions. And these interventions are designed to build those capacities so that these universities can be able to compete for funding, research funding, and the development type of funding. So we did, as Dr. Washington mentioned, we implemented, we have resources that will be disseminated soon from the first cycle. But again, we are continuing based on what we learned, we are continuing to develop this model at these institutions. There's 5 institutions Dr. Washington mentioned. And again, we know that research capacity building takes time, and we want to, we have looked at the institutions that really are research intensive, how long it took them to be where they are. And we hope that if the agency, NIDILRR and other agencies commit to continue funding these agencies, we are seeing progress, that these universities will continue to develop new knowledge as well and contribute to to the new knowledge that we are looking for so that we can address the problems that African Americans with disabilities experience, and of course other minorities from. Thank you, Dr. Washington.
Yes, thank you, Evan. Moving towards our COVID-19 research agenda, which like I had mentioned previous, this wasn't really a part of our broad research agenda when we started this second iteration of our RRTC. But as you know, the COVID, the pandemic hit, and it is a very, very important element of what's going on right now. So we added this COVID-19 agenda. So on May 27th, the RRTC facilitated a national listening session. The purpose was to frame the context for national COVID-19 applied disability and health and rehabilitation R&D, research and development, agenda targeting African Americans and other people of color with disabilities. So that particular listening session was very, very well received. We had Dr. Kimberly Jones, a renowned epidemiologist, to come and do a presentation to the webinar and to the national listen with the national listening session. It was very informative. You could go on to our website, our RRTC website, and see her presentation at your leisure. What we heard helped us develop a policy brief, and the policy brief also is located on the LURRTC website. I will give the website there at the end. It'll be posted up on the slide. But forecasting the COVID-19 issues for people of color with disabilities while advancing the minority serving institution research capacity building science, a framework for federal agencies. So we gave a few recommendations that we thought that was that would be impactful within that particular journal. So you feel free to go to our RRTC website to review that. Did I miss anything, Edward? Should I move? Can I move on?
Yes, let's move on. Yes.
All right. So we had something new just yesterday, February 11th, yesterday morning. We had a collaboration meeting with FEMA Region 6 officials, David Vieta and Karen Stafford. They are Region 6 administrators. David's an academic advisor for Region 6, and Karen Stafford is a national disaster recovery. She's in the support area. She's actually a nurse by professional trade as well. So we had a very good discussion with them yesterday about things that we can do to help the COVID-19 pandemic out and what's happening now and then in the future. So dissemination of RRTC research findings for COVID-19. We talked about coming up with a good dissemination plan within Region 6 and then nationally to get that information out that we have come up with. The dissemination of FEMA's COVID-19 service information activities for persons with disabilities. They have a big push about making sure individuals with disabilities are not forgotten and their special needs are taken care of, because as you know, what's going on, kind of it's a disparity between individuals with disabilities and individuals of color, disparity of services and different type of health information being given to them, or health activities being given to them or afforded to them. So it's a big disparity between them and their kind of African Americans and visual disabilities and their counterparts. Possible research collaboration on COVID-19 disaster management was discussed as well. So nothing set in concrete, but the just the idea of having this, being able to have this discussion with FEMA and Region 6, which is, of course, the region that's Oklahoma's in. I believe it's 5 states. So it's Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, Texas, and I'm forgetting one. It would. I'm forgetting one of the states. It's 5 states.
Yeah, we have Arkansas, Louisiana.
Yeah, Arkansas. That's what I was missing. So thank you. So it was a very good meeting. We're looking to build on that and see what comes out of that particular collaboration. Continuing. Yeah. Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, I was just mentioning that one thing that they really stress is that generally people with disabilities are almost always forgotten during disasters. And so when they saw our policy brief, they were so excited that we are addressing that and kind of provide some framework on how several recommendations now how federal agencies can address that issue, especially when it comes to populations, African Americans, of course, and other individuals from minority groups.
Mm-hmm. So continuing with the recommendations of addressing the inequalities, funding inequalities, NIDILRR, NIH, and other federal research agencies should inventory all current streams of funding to determine if inequities exist by institutional type, i.e. HBCUs across the R&D investment. That's, of course, was one of our main goals here at the RRTC to, like Ed was saying, is turn that ship around or turn things around where minority institutions are able to get more funding and secure more funding for research. Access to information, NIDILRR, NIH, and other research funding agencies should collaboratively fund an annual network conference to provide HBCUs and faculty and research on research opportunities and learn more about the data available in our IRB approval process and rehabilitation agencies and centers, hospitals, community health and community health centers, etc. Then the last one, NIDILRR, NIH, and other federal agencies should develop new creative avenues to communicate opportunities, FOAs, requests for comments, grants with HBCU faculty and scholars. So I do want to mention that we are trying to address some of these recommendations that we have. We're going to have a webcast for this particular situation with NIDILRR and NIH and other agencies coming together and talking about their networks and how to talk about their funding streams and things like that. So we'll be putting that information out on our website and the dates of that particular activities. So we're looking forward to that to address that to help start addressing that particular need for minority entities. So we go into technical assistance there and our consulting services here at the RRTC. We have we have different streams of services. Of course, we have the research and training center area and the research capacity building. Then we have the technical assistance side of what we do. So yes, we do work with the entities that we're closely involved with within the IRC-BIM project, but that's not all. We're a national center. Any minority entity that contact us for technical assistance, we help them. We help them in whatever area they think they need help. So it's just not we're only working with the particular 5 institutions in our longitudinal study. we consider it a national center. So any minority entity that asks for assistance and research capacity building, we're there for them. We have on our website.
Excuse me, Dr.
Yes.
Washington. This is
Yes.
Shelly Reeves. We're
Yes.
nearing our time to wrap up the presentations and move into the question and answer segment.
Thank you.
You have a
Thank
chance.
you very much. How many minutes we got?
We're right on time. We just need to
wrap it up. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Edward, I'll let you do the way forward, and then we'll do question and answer.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so what's the way forward? This is just a few recommendations, but there are more that we can do. As we understand, this is complex, but we feel strong that strengthening research capacity at HBCUs, which in this institution predominantly serve African Americans, is essential to maintaining and advancing a vital research enterprise in disability and health research, as well as eliminating long-standing disability health and rehabilitation disparities. HBCU's participation as federal research agency partners are a key to efforts to diversify the scientific workforce, as well as training the next generation of scientists. We know how important that diversity matters, so we feel that HBCUs can play a huge role in this aspect.
Thank you, Ms. Reeves. That concludes what me and Dr. Manyibe has. There's our contact information in the Research Training Center's website. Feel free to visit at your leisure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to all of our presenters for this particular session. Very informative presentations, and we do have several questions that have been put up in the Q&A box. A number of questions actually address Langston University and your RRTC activities. One question is these kinds of mentoring models are important, but I wonder what you are doing to support the development of professionals with disabilities. Are any of these programs focused on selecting, mentoring, etc., African Americans, Native Americans, and Latino students, scholars with disabilities? If so, are there any special mentoring or support techniques that you are using with this particular population? I would hope that if you are selecting persons with disabilities, you would include both people with lifelong disabilities, IDD, etc., as well as people with physical disabilities and adult onset disabilities.
Yes, so yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. In fact, these models are exactly designed to address the issue that you've raised. In terms of who is involved, as you can see, our goal is to we see the institutions that are close to these people they serve. For example, Hispanic serving institutions where we are doing our where we are implementing one of the model. These institutions generally tend to attract a good percentage of individuals from the Hispanic community. So we hope that by developing those institutions, then they can also they can continue to attract more individuals who can benefit from that. One thing that we realize is that generally scholars, including students from traditional underserved racial and ethnic communities, do not have role models at these institutions. In most cases, the mentors that we have used are from white institutions, traditional white institutions. And some of these individuals, if they are based at other institutions, not easy to come by. So once we develop the capacity. Once we develop individuals who have these skills within this institution, then you have the role models. And then we hope that the universities, in fact, Mercy College, which is a Hispanic serving institution, has contacted us to see ways they can expand that model to the whole university. And this is for us very, very important, because then it's gonna have a huge effect across the board. Some of our postdocs are individuals with that disability. So we try as much as possible to recruit individuals to make sure that the information, when we are doing recruitment, individuals with disabilities get information. The individuals that we send this information with, when we have any meetings, informational meetings, make sure that we are really making it very clear that the people understand that individuals with disabilities are really not participating in this research arena. So we want to find ways on how they can be developed. So if they can participate in this, once the application, if they apply, in fact, we tend to, of course, we look at everything, but if somebody says a has a disability, we get so interested to know how best we can make sure that they gain from these mentoring programs that we have. So Dr. Washington, maybe something you might want to add?
No, I think you hit it right on the head. Nothing to add.
Yeah, Shelly, yeah, I think you are muted.
Yes, thank you. One other question, or a couple actually questions came in regarding your vocational rehabilitation and veteran affairs research project. And how could folks find out more information about the work that's being done in this particular project, and also with tribal voc rehab?
Yes, you can always go to our website, and we always update all our information as it comes in pertaining our projects. But if you wanted to get some, in between information, or just have a conversation with me, I'm the co-PI for that particular project, you can always email me at andre.washington@langston.edu. I've answered a question. I was kind of typing and answering a question in Q&A. Someone asked for our emails, me and Dr. Manyibe. So I put that in. I typed both our emails in the response for the in the question answering session. So yeah, anytime you want information or some detailed information about our projects, feel free to contact us. But we always put information up on our website about our projects as it comes in, as we complete or have some preliminary data or whatnot.
Great, thank you. Is Langston's COVID-19 research at all connected with the AUCD COVID project in partnership with Morehouse? That's another question that came in.
Yeah, not at this time. We will be interested to know what they are doing, and so we can see how best we can collaborate on this. If there's a way we can share some information, but as of now, we do not have any collaboration with them at this point.
Any recommendations for folks in the field on how they can support the recommendations in your report?
Yes, I'll go, and then Dr. Washington, maybe you can add. Yeah, there is several ways. Number one, depending on which position you are. Let's say our approach, if it's a minority serving institutions, or maybe at the federal level, or at this, the community level. So there are different layers, and our recommendations target different individuals or different groups of people. For example, at the minority serving institution level, we recommend that the institutional leaders find ways of providing mentorship opportunities that are designed to help faculty members and the students get engaged in research. So those professional development opportunities, especially if if possible, if institutions can start formal mentoring opportunities, that would be great, because then that's something that's available. We know informal mentorships work, but again, as we say, there are so many role models. So, so we encourage institutions to do that. So if it's from the federal agency level, it's needed to see how you can partner, especially with minority serving institutions. These institutions work closely with the communities that they work, they understand the problems, they know how to, they connect with them. We see currently what's going on in terms of mistrust of vaccinations. But if you partner with these institutions, chances are that you're going to address, because these communities tend to trust people who understand them, who are close to them, who work with them on mostly on almost on a daily basis. But at the individual level, for example, if you're a scholar, it's good to look at opportunities. Sometimes these opportunities, you have to look for them. You have to be creative. You have to be, look for these opportunities, apply for funding. You might fail the first time, but second time, third time, but still continue. The more you try, the better you become in understanding the landscape. So there are quite a number, and because of time, maybe some of we also encourage you to get in touch with us so we can discuss some of these things and see how best, perhaps, because I don't know the exact way the individual asking the question wants to help, but generally, those are some of the areas. But of course, when we make announcements, when we are looking for individuals to participate in our mentorship programs, if you know somebody who can benefit, somebody with a disability, we strongly encourage. Somebody, please encourage them to apply. And so we see whether we can, there's a way we can work with them. So Dr. Washington, something to add?
Yeah, I was going to add also, if just piggyback on what you said. If you kind of depends on what area you're in. If you are in the vocation, say you're a vocational rehab professional, and you want to look at these recommendations and find let's see what I can do to help these recommendations out. It's to try to get into a partnership with the VA or contact the VA, and if that's the particular recommendation that you was looking at, or contact us and let us know, hey, you looked at these recommendations, how would you actually put these to work in the field, and we could even collaborate with you even more to make sure that your question is addressed, or how you can whatever recommendation that you are speaking of, that we can help you maybe put that to work. We all about knowledge translation, and being that it's no good for what we research and what we do, and we have all these good findings and recommendations if it don't trickle down to the field and to everyday work and everyday livelihoods for individuals with disabilities. So I would just add that.
Thank you. And I think we have time just for one last question about the infographic presentation. I know it's hard to get this into an infographic, but do you have tables for those of us who want more nuance that includes the type of disability of those who are typically out of the classroom or incarcerated? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We don't have a product, like a companion product with those tables or anything like that, but we can certainly provide data information. We often respond to technical assistance requests for data such as this, so feel free to email us at disability.statistics@unh.edu. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this discussion. I'll turn things over to Dr. Houtenville for the final portion of this session.
Well, thank you all very much. That was a great presentation. Really fascinating information, that's for sure. Lots of opportunities and for connections across the various NIDILRR funded grantees and the people out in the field of disability statistics. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and then turn it over to David Wittenberg and David Mann from Mathematica Policy Research. They're going to give a summary of the 4 days, and then I'll just provide some wrapping up comments at the end.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Hopefully you can hear me, is that right?
Yes, I hear you well.
Great. So I'm going to take this one, something David and I worked on together, and I was thinking of a quote that could summarize the events of the last 4 days, and I came up with something from Chip and Dan Heath, which is data are just summaries of thousands of stories. Tell a few of those stories to help make the data meaningful. And as we look at like news stories, we look at Twitter and we look at Facebook, and we look at all the stories that are bubbling up in the media, you can see all of those stories reflected in the presentation of the past few days. Yesterday, as one example, I saw a story of a young boy with autism named Deshaun who lost his limbs due to COVID complications. And there's just these repeated stories in the news, particularly around things around COVID vaccines, that make issues about disability and statistics really, really vital now to planning. So in reflecting on the past 4 days, I wanted to provide attendees with 3 general takeaways that I had. And the first takeaway is something I've mentioned in earlier presentations, but COVID is a disability issue. When you take a look at the items that were discussed in the past 4 days: employment, poverty, disability prevalence, caregiving, food insecurity, medical access, COVID has been making these issues grow even larger in disparities. When you look at particularly striking is the lack of access to vaccines, which literally becomes a life and death discussion. And you see this playing out on social media every day, and it is very, very striking. The second takeaway from the last 4 days is regionality. Regionality plays a very important role in thinking through disability and social policy. And when you think about the indicators, particularly earlier in the conference, the county and the state data show substantial regional variation in all the outcomes that I just mentioned. And third, and this is something that was covered today, is intersectionality. Intersectionality plays an important role in understanding the dynamics to improve policy and evaluation. The effects are disproportionate on people with disabilities and on communities of color. And there are also disproportionate effects by gender. As one thing that we hadn't really discussed is the effects on female labor supply. In a recent podcast, Melinda Gates noted nearly 100% of the labor decline was explained recently by female labor supply declines, as there were shifts out of service occupations and dire needs for caregiving at home. So in reflecting on the conference, I want to go back to where Phil Beatty started us with, which was some perspective, which is last year, he reminded us we were all together in meetings. I should say a subset of us were together in meetings in Washington, D.C. And we were literally shaking hands and conversing, interacting. And then he starkly talked about the events of the past year, both the health and the social events, COVID and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and these things that have created major shifts in our culture that have pushed us inward and have scattered us across the country. And these are the things that we have to look to rebuild. And one of the best ways to rebuild these things is bringing a strong foundation of evidence, and evidence that has been under attack. But it's not just evidence, it's also messaging and connectivity. And that is going to be a key role. So just going into some of the specific examples of day one, as you look at the agenda. In the first day, we saw statistics from the Compendium showing regionality. Just in the state of Maryland, prevalence ranged by county from 7 to 20%. Employment range from 27 to 54%. Poverty range from 9 to 37% in work shown by Shreya Paul and Megan Henley. And there are large state differences as well, as Arkansas, Mississippi, and Kentucky and West Virginia were states with the highest rates. So the point is, county and state differences matter. And when we think about policy, everything starts to become down to the local level. And this is how we're going to have to start thinking about the solutions, because the solutions that work in one area, particularly a rural area versus an urban area, could be quite different. Day two started to bring out what I called COVID is a disability issue, and this was the federal panel where they talked a lot about planning and adaptability of data collections. Federal agencies were able to adapt several new questions related to COVID and health indicators into existing surveys, particularly indicators around mental health and COVID-related outcomes. There's also an increasing availability when we look at occupational factors, which is important, which Michelle Dresner brought up, because that gives us a sense of labor demand. What are the factors and how are people going to be adapting to the new workplaces? On the flip side, Chris McLaren was showing us some of the labor supply factors of how people are adapting to their new workplaces and working with telehealth, and some alarming evidence on how they're accessing medical care and some of the much larger disparities that are occurring for people with disabilities. In day three, we had this continuation of what I call disability as a COVID issues in talking about the disparities of outcomes. Allison Colby showed where disparities are emerging using machine language learning. These factors included disparities in outcomes that are related to, the biggest ones were disability, socioeconomic factors, obesity, and access to healthcare. Again, touching on this disability issue, regionality issue, as well as intersectionality. Kimberly Phillips talked about the challenges that people with disabilities face with telehealth. Even though more people use it, their satisfaction was far less than people without disabilities. Potentially likely because the nuance of the factors that needed to be discussed in a telehealth visit couldn't be covered. And Deb Rucker noted the further obstacles of food insecurity and the obstacles that people with disabilities face there. And finally, Andrew presented trends in employment showing the very large decline in employment and how while there's been some recovery in employment, it still lags behind those without disability. And finally, for day four was definitely about intersectionality and trying to find a way forward. And Marisa Rafal showed the intersectionality between disability and race in the scorecards discussed earlier. And Drs. Edward Manyibe and Andre Washington showed how Langston is taking active steps using data, technology, and early interventions with examples of peer-to-peer mentorship to improve the infrastructure of data research and capacity building. And I think one of the really important aspects of that previous presentation is the importance of connectivity, of building that infrastructure. So that is the data. So when we think about the data, what is the policy of the 4 days? What are we looking forward to in 2021? What are we going to be talking about next year? And item number one has to be the vaccine. That will be the primary topic of discussion. But item number two is going to be service provision gaps. And this includes service provision by state and local agencies who are under extreme duress in terms of tax revenues, as well as nonprofit service providers who provide those services. There are also program planning issues that are related to the service provision gaps. For example, in Texas, for home and community-based services, recently there's approximately over 100,000 people on waiting lists for these services. And there's been major changes when you look at the federal disability programs in terms of the number of applications and awards. And some of these may relate to field offices being closed, but it could also relate to this overall networking effect of not being able to access medical care and not being networked. So in sum, data are just summaries of thousands of stories. Tell a few of those stories to help make the data meaningful. I think as this conference showed, disability, intersectionality, and regional differences are keys going forward in developing the response to COVID. But it's also the simple direct action and people connecting to people, particularly in your local area. I think a lot of times as policy researchers, we often look for the perfect policy before taking action, and sometimes forget that we ourselves can take direct action in our local communities, whether it be working with nonprofits, whether it just simply be helping neighbors, but connecting with people and addressing these issues, particularly as we see things like increases in social isolation and mental health issues are particularly important during these times. So Andrew, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, David. I put on a jacket and a tie because Dave upped the ante, although I think my lapel is like blazing, isn't it? Is it like freaking out? All right,
Still
well,
looks good.
all right, thanks, David. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, David, for that excellent summary of the last 4 days. You know, we provide a lot of technical assistance over the years, and you know, if anybody needs any information that you haven't seen today or over the last 4 days, we'll be glad to continue the discussion with you over the course of the next year. We will be doing this event next year. We'll probably have an in-person element, although that will be really strange because, you know, hopefully we'll have plenty of, you know, it won't be near the reopening. Hopefully it will be several months into everything being back to quote unquote normal. So I'm going to stop there and thank everybody. Thank you, David. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you, Andre. And thanks to Kim and to, I need to go back, sorry. Andre and Edward, Kim and Marisa, thank you very much. I also want to say a special thanks to Karen Voley and Kate Filanowski and Romy Embry for all their support and assistance, and Tony Sumner-Beebe for all their assistance during the course of this 4 days. It's been an interesting ride creating this agenda, and I think with Kate and Karen's help, it really turned out very, very well. I want to thank NIDILRR for their support over the years, and I guess I'll just stop there. Well, thank you, everybody. Look to disabilitycompendium.org for updates on all the slides and all the recordings as we go along. So thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.